If you go to our website, www.mentalhealthday.org, you'll discover that today's date is National Take a Mental Health Day. If you go there tomorrow, you'll discover that tomorrow's date is National Take a Mental Health Day, and the day after that, too. So that proves that today is National Take a Mental Health Day, and so is tomorrow.
Your podcast starts in 3, 2, 1.
Oh.
Good morning, Doctor. Time to wake up.
Oh. Thank you, Ivan. It's going to be a great day at the Mental Health Day podcast. I'm Todd Finnerty. I'm a clinical psychologist, and welcome to the Mental Health Day podcast number 3, coming to you from the Phineas Gage Auditorium. Today, we're talking about concussions. Yes, that's right, concussions. You hear a lot about them with pro athletes, but what would happen if someone you love, a friend, your child, smacks their head really hard, right? I mean, you can stare at their eyes, but do you know what you're looking for? It's certainly, as I probably mentioned in the interview, make the inappropriate cartoon reference. There won't be birds tweeting around their heads, but I've brought in expert neuropsychologist Tom Sullivan to talk to us about what to look for when we see somebody who may have had a concussion. Dr. Thomas Sullivan is a Yale-trained Cincinnati neuropsychologist. He created the Cincinnati Bengals Head Injury Management Program in 1998 and was its director for 12 years. He still consults with them, and he consulted to the NFL in the startup phase of their head injury assessment program in 2011. He's also worked with colleges, high school athletic programs, and others regarding their concussion management services. I just had a chance to speak to Dr. Sullivan on the phone, and why don't you have a listen? Maybe before we really get into things, why don't you give us an idea about, what a neuropsychologist is and, what sort of things do they do?
Okay. Well, neuropsychologists do testing with people about how they're functioning and typically how their brain is functioning. So we do behavioral testing with people, and in this situation, behavior is defined very broadly. So we're the people who create memory tests, attention tests, intelligence tests, tests of motor and sensory functioning. And so we're scientists that work with people with brain injuries or illnesses or any type of dysfunction to find out, how it's affecting them and the impact on their day-to-day functioning, work functioning, school functioning, that type of thing. So that's what I've been doing for about the past 20 years. And since 1998, I've been working with the Cincinnati Bengals. What I do is evaluate all the players when they come onto the team to find out how they typically function. And then when they get a concussion, I do a reevaluation with them. If they've recovered, then they're clear to play and go back to doing their typical activities. But if not, then I'll go back and see them every few days and reevaluate them until they've recovered. It's nice to have a person who works directly with them, who knows them, because I answer a lot of questions from wives and mothers and fathers and agents, and people are very concerned about concussion now. So it's nice to have an actual doctor sitting with you to just walk you through things and answer questions and show you your recovery in terms of attention and memory functioning and that type of thing.
It's interesting that you had that baseline testing of them beforehand.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
most people think that football players are, big lunkheads, but in actuality, people in the NFL many of them are very, very bright, and some of them don't function as well. So, if you didn't know how the person functioned before a concussion, it's very, very hard to determine how the concussion has affected them. So, I can do it, but it takes me 6 hours of testing instead of just half an hour if I have a baseline.
Sure. I heard that's something even like the military is doing now with a lot of soldiers. They'll give them that sort of baseline neuropsych testing or at least some kind of screening measure before they deploy, I should say.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the soldiers now are having blast injuries. So I was working with a contractor to the Department of Defense, and what I learned is the soldiers are driving around in armored Humvees, and they'll hit a landmine planted in the road, and the Humvee gets blown into the air. Because it's armored, they frequently don't have piercing injuries, but they have blast injuries where they're, violently thrown around inside the vehicle. So they're getting closed head injuries frequently from that. So in the past 15 years, there have been some new computerized assessment modalities published. And they've gotten very popular, and one of the reasons they're very popular is they're inexpensive and they're easy to do with people. So, for example, with one of these companies, you can buy a program for it's about $700, and with that program, you can evaluate, say, every child in your high school. So, every child who's going to play a sport, you can put them on this computer program. And in half an hour, you can have a baseline of how they function neuropsychologically. There's a lot of good things about that. There are some bad things about that too. One of the major ones being you have to monitor people very closely while they're doing their baseline testing because I've had people who I'm sitting with them trying to do baseline testing and they're trying to talk on their cell phone or goof around with their friends who are out in the hallway, or there's loud music playing, or they have the flu, or they're not giving their best effort, or somebody's already given them the answers, that type of thing. So
Sure.
You have to monitor people very carefully in order to have a legitimate baseline of how they're functioning.
That makes sense. But the fact that the technology is available to make it hopefully cost effective for school districts and things like that. It's certainly, if we can push that into the future.
Yeah, well, it's there are very few neuropsychologists available, and if you hire somebody with a PhD to sit down with somebody to do an evaluation, it's obviously very expensive. And there are 1.5 million high school football players in the U.S. each year, so you don't want to pay me $50 each to sit down with each of them.
Right.
That's just a little too expensive. And, there are some kids who are on the team, but, they'll play very rarely, that type of thing. So,
Sure.
But if they do play, they might be the smaller child or the least athletic child, and they may get a concussion anyway. So it's very, very helpful to have the baseline testing, but the schools don't want to pay to have a doctor sit down with every child who plays sports. So the computerized model is very, very nice and very efficient.
So we have all these kids out there, and even everybody has a chance of having kind of a head injury of some kind, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of us, most of what we know is from cartoons, right? Somebody hits their head and the bird circles around their head, and that's how we know that they've hit their head, right?
The cool thing is you can fall off a cliff.
That's true.
Just go for a mile.
Have an anvil drop.
When you hit the ground, all that happens is the birds circle around your head.
So if a friend of ours or our child's were to hit their head somehow, what kind of things should we look for? What are some of the symptoms and danger signs of a concussion?
People who have a concussion do seem dazed and confused. So 95% of people who have a concussion, they'll show symptoms as soon as they have it. The most common symptoms are they seem kind of vacant, kind of absent. They move and talk very slowly, seem confused, and they lose attention. So you're talking to them, and then they forget what you're saying to them. So they're disoriented. Now, when you're dealing with a small child, frequently they'll show kind of emotionality. So they might be crying or carrying on. Obviously, the easiest thing to see with a concussion is unconsciousness. Actually, some research done with hockey players showed that hockey players who had a concussion and were knocked unconscious had a quicker recovery than those that were not knocked unconscious. And it seems that people who are knocked unconscious, it's very, very obvious that they've had a concussion. So people know to be careful with putting them back into activities, where people who are just dazed and confused, frequently coaches will push them to go back into playing. That's a very, very bad idea. So people will show slurred or incoherent speech, and headaches are very common. The other thing that's common is people will be sensitive to light and sensitive to loud noises. The night of a concussion, people will frequently have a lot of fatigue, or conversely, they'll have sleep disturbance where they can't fall asleep. So they feel terrible. They feel very sleepy, but they can't fall asleep. And a lot of people will get very irritable.
So how should people respond that they're maybe watching and they think someone has had a concussion? What do you think they should do? What are their options?
The amazing thing about working with NFL players over the years is the most beneficial thing with a concussion is rest. Really, the only kind of effective treatment we have for concussion is rest. But so I've worked with a professional football team for a number of years that has a very, very good concussion management program. As soon as the guys get a concussion, they're taken out, and they can't do anything again until I give approval for them to do that, and the medical staff has to give approval too. I used to work for a professional hockey team, and their policy was, if you got a concussion, you got to sit out for 5 minutes, and then they put you back in the game. Well, if in that situation, those players took an incredibly long time to recover from their concussions. It would frequently take a month or two to stop feeling acutely ill from their concussion. Whereas, professional football players who get taken out immediately, they have a very nice, rapid recovery and feel a lot better, a lot faster. So the most effective thing you can do if somebody gets a concussion is to remove them from play and don't let them return to the play. The Center for Disease Control has a very nice program. It's called Heads Up, and they have nice materials online. So what they recommend is consistent with what everybody else recommends. If you see somebody get a concussion, remove them from play. Don't let them return to play. If the person is knocked out, then you let the EMTs move them, because they may have a concussion and they may also have an orthopedic injury, so they could have a fracture in their neck or their spine. You don't want to hurt them by moving them. Then what you want to do is consult with a professional, either your family doctor or a neuropsychologist or somebody who specializes in providing care for concussions. The trouble with talking to your family doctor is a lot of family doctors call me during sports season and say, what do I do? This kid's in my office and he's had a concussion, and I don't know what to tell him. So you want to make sure that you're talking to somebody who knows about concussions, and if you meet with your doctor, it's appropriate to make sure that your doctor does know about concussions, because just being a physician doesn't mean you're omniscient. You want to make sure that the person actually knows about concussion and knows how to counsel you effectively.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for talking to us today. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to add, or any other resources that you can think of?
Well, the Heads Up materials are very good online from the Center for Disease Control. There's a commercial testing program. I don't have any kind of financial ties with them. The most popular one is the Impact Test, and they have very nice materials on their website too about concussion management, and about their software package. And one of the nice things about that is for each state, they give you a list of providers. So, if you're in Arizona and your kid gets a concussion, you can go on that website and find a local provider that is an expert about concussions.
Sounds great. And people can go to your website too. You're a Cincinnati neuropsychologist, thomassullivanphd.com.
That's right. And I'm always happy, if somebody wants to send me an email, I'm always happy to answer questions. I make a nice living, so I don't have to worry about charging somebody $5 to answer an email or doing something ridiculous like that. So I'm always happy to answer an email.
Sounds good.
Visit the podcast at www.mentalhealthday.org.
Malfunction.